for your opening and closing stock. Sessions today should last around about 45 minutes. It's probably going to be one of those topics, if you're all okay with journals and maybe you're familiar with your management reports, that you're going to probably get the concept of. If you're not that familiar with them, the recording will be available afterwards. So if you need a bit of a recap, maybe to run through it again in your own time, or maybe you want to look at the help information, that may help as well. So it might not click for some people. So that's my word of warning. Anyway, today we're going to be looking at how you go about posting those adjustments and why you go about posting those adjustments as well. Now, today we're joined by Jackie and also by Abby. They'll be on hand to answer your questions in the background. So I'll be doing the talking in the demos while they pick up any questions that you might have as well. Now, a little bit of housekeeping before we get started on the session this afternoon. So you don't need a microphone for these sessions. If you've got one, it will be muted automatically, and you'll find you can't unmute yourself. So you can't verbally ask us any questions, but you will be able to type them into the questions panel. So any questions or comments you have today, then just submit them via that questions panel. You won't be able to see it until you click the little icon on your toolbar, the one that looks like the speech bubble containing the question mark. When you do that, the panel will expand. You'll get the box in the corner. You'll have that available to you throughout, so you can show or hide it whenever you want. Pop your question in that box at the bottom, and either, as I say, Abby or Jackie, they're on hand and they'll try and answer any questions you have. A recording of the session will be circulated later today, so you will get a follow-up email as normal. That will give you a number of links. One will be to the recording of today's session, but also it will include a link so you can register for other webinars. And also, if you've missed any of our other sessions, there'll also be a link to our recordings list as well. You can also download a copy of today's slides. So if you do want a copy of those, then just again use that little icon on your toolbar. A link should be included on your follow-up email as well. So that will include a link so you can watch a recording. So it'll also link off to Sage City, so you can go and view and download the handout again. And if there's any common questions that you asked today, we'll try and get those published along with some of the answers as well. But we'll try and pick most of them up during the session today. Right, let's have a look at what we're going to be covering. So a little bit of background first of all. So what are stock journals? Why do we post them into our accounts? I'm going to run through an example as well. So we're trying to demonstrate what your P&L report would look like when you don't post them, and then what it will look like once you have posted them. We'll be looking at the software as well. We're then going to run through a couple of demonstrations on actually how to post the journals. Now, I want to start with the manual journals to begin with, so you can see what it looks like when you're entering the manual debits and credits. But there's also a wizard option, which is going to make it that little bit easier for you. Now, there's probably a little difference in the way that you post manual journals to the way that the wizard's going to post them, in so much that the way that you group the journals together. But we'll cover that in more detail when we get to that point. And then just at the end, we'll explain more about additional support and also hang around for any questions that you might have as well. So I'll maybe try and pick up some additional demos towards the end as well. But keep your questions coming. We'll try and answer as many as we can. Right, so let's get started. We'll start with a little bit of background to opening and closing stock journals. So what are stock journals to begin with? Well, they're basically journals that you're going to post to adjust your profit and loss calculation. And we'll see that in the demonstration, the example that we've got in just a couple of minutes. And by posting those adjustments as well, the idea is to ensure that your profit value for a specific period takes into account any unsold stock. Now, hopefully this is going to become clearer as we work through a bit of a demo. Now, if you downloaded the handouts, the green buttons that I've got on the bottom of the various slides, they will take you across to the relevant help articles. So there's some nice detailed information on journals, why you post them, etc., available within our help center. So why are you going to post opening and closing stock journals? Well, by default, in Sage 50 accounts, your profit and loss report, it's going to show the gross profit. It's going to calculate that as being basically your sales less your purchases. Now it's actually the gross profit we're talking about. So sales less purchases. So it takes into account the cost of your purchases, but it doesn't make an allowance for any unsold stock. So if you buy all of your stock up front or in bulk, and that covers, and you'll use that over a much longer period of time, or maybe you buy it in 1 year and you're still using that stock within the following financial year, then this is where you want to make an adjustment or an allowance for that unsold stock, so it relates to the relevant period. So it's all about matching the cost of that stock to the period in which it supports your sales. So quick example, and we're going to build on this a little bit in the session today as well. So in January, we've got sales of £12,000, and also in that period, we've made purchases of £10,000. February, I've got to try and keep this nice and simple. We've made £11,000 worth of sales only. We've made no additional purchases. And then we're going to say in March, we've sold £3,000. And again, we've made no purchases. Now, if we just use the default calculation that we mentioned, sales less purchases, so I'll just pop onto my next slide, what it's going to look like, that basic sort of gross profit calculation, is that we've only got a gross profit of £2,000 in the month of January. February looks a lot more healthy with £11,000, and March £3,000. So even March, with its much lower sales value, it looks a lot better than the month of January. So this is where essentially where we want to post adjustments to take into account any stock that we've got left over. So going on to that second bullet point on the slide there, once we've posted opening closing stock transactions, so those journal adjustments, the profit and loss report is then going to calculate the gross profit. Rather than sales just less purchases, it's going to do sales less cost of sales. Now, if you've ever done any sort of accounting theory or done any training on it, you've probably come across cost of sales before. So cost of sales, generally it's classed as your opening stock value in a period, plus the value of any purchases, less any closing stock. So we're going to look at that cost of sales calculation in the background. We're going to essentially post our opening closing stock adjustments to essentially give us or bring into the equation that cost of sales calculation. So let's just quickly head back to the slides for a moment. So I've now put in the left-hand column there on the example, I've put some closing stock values. So in the month of January, we're still saying our sales is £12,000. Of the purchases that we made, the £10,000, we've still got £5,000 of it left. And that's what we need to do an adjustment for. So in that right-hand column, sales, £12,000, less our cost of sales. So again, keeping it simple, I'm saying I had no opening stock, so zero. We've made £10,000 worth of purchases, and we want to deduct our closing stock value. So by doing that, we've now got a gross profit figure of £7,000 in January. Similar calculation for February. This time we're saying we had a closing stock of 1,000. So the closing stock of one period becomes the opening stock of the next period. So in February, we've got opening stock of £5,000. So this figure here. We've got zero purchases, and our closing stock is £1,000. So our gross profit calculation comes in at £7,000. So looking at the values now, rather than £2,000 in January and £11,000 in February, we've actually got £7,000 gross profit figure in both January and February, and a slightly lower figure in March as well. So we're assigning the cost of the goods to the relevant period to which essentially it relates. And that's what we're going to try and achieve by posting these stock adjustments. Now, before we post any opening closing stock journals, you need to make sure you've got the relevant nominal codes available to you. Now, these should be available by default. They are standard nominal codes. So if you're using the default nominal ledger structure, so the standard sort of list, you'll have these 3 nominal codes already available. So we've got 2 in the 5,000 range, 1 for opening stock, 1 for closing stock. And we've also got a balance sheet code in the 1,000 range. So just make sure you've got those available. You should, as I say, if you're using that default list. Right, let's move on then, and we'll start looking at the software, and we're going to start looking at some manual journals as well. Now, just before we come on to those 2 examples, what I'll quickly do is I will go back to, I'm going to share my desktop, and just going to set the scene a little bit at this stage. So I've got my transactions entered. That's all I've got on the system today. So I've got the 1 purchase invoice for the £10,000 worth of purchases we made in January. And I've got 3 sales transactions. So 1 in January, 1 in February, and 1 in March, replicating those values that were on that little table. Now, if I pop into nominal codes and I quickly run a profit and loss, let's preview it. And I'll run it for January only. Let's zoom in to make that a little bit bigger. And what we can see is we've got our £12,000 less the £10,000. Because we've got no direct expenses in this example either, our gross profit is showing £2,000. So this is before us posting any opening closing stock adjustments. If we run the same report, so the profit and loss again, this time we run it for, I'll run it for February only this time. Again, let's just zoom in so you can see that. So looking at February, so February in this case, because we've run it from month 2 to month 2, the individual February figures are going to be in the period column. So we've got £11,000 worth of sales, we've got nothing in the purchases. Year to date, however, obviously it includes January, so we've got the £23,000 worth of sales at that point, and the original 10,000 as well. So again, keeping the data really simple, just so we can hopefully try and see what the adjustments are achieving. Right, let's pop back to the slides. We'll just quickly tell you, first of all, a little bit about manual journals. And then we'll get stuck into a demonstration. Now, manual journals, you could post in a number of different ways. One is to import them, but we're just going to look today at going within nominal codes and then using the journal entry option. So we've got a screenshot of the journal entry screen. Now, if you're not that familiar with journals, we did run a webinar recently, so there is a recording of that one available. Again, the link will be included on your follow-up email, so you can watch recordings. And also, if you tend to make mistakes, so if you're still in the habit of getting your debits and credits the wrong way around, or needing to sort of delete a journal, anything of that nature, popping a date in wrong, anything like that, then we've got an upcoming corrections webinar as well, so you can get yourself signed up for that one. There's a couple of things to mention with regard to the journal screen. I'll point these out along the way as well as we work through the example. So memorize and recall can help you sort of speed up that process. So that's an option within the journal entry screen that's only available on the professional level of the software. And also the reverse journals option. That's quite a handy option in this scenario for Sage 50 accounts. So it's available in both the standard and the professional levels of the software. So you don't have that one if you're on the essentials level. But we'll show you how to do them manually anyway. Right, so we're going to use that option to post some adjustments, and I'm going to show you at the stage what to do. So back to my screen. In nominal codes, we're going to go to journal entry. Right, now for January, we assumed there was no opening stock. So we started with 0. And in January, we made £10,000 worth of purchases. And going back to the example earlier, we had £5,000 of that left at the end of the month. So for January, we don't need to post an opening stock journal. We just need to do a closing stock journal. That's the only value we have. So I'm going to put, I'll put CL stock to try and make it a bit obvious. So for closing stock. And I'm going to go back to January. Now, some people will get really hung up on the dates at this stage, thinking, right, opening stock, it must be posted on the 1st, closing stock must be the last day of the month. You're posting these adjustments so that they affect your profit and loss report in the correct way. So as long as they go into the correct period, then that would absolutely be fine. It wouldn't matter if I posted both opening and closing stock, in this instance, on the same date. It wouldn't matter in that respect. But I'm just going to do closing stock at this stage. So I'm going to use I'll use the last day of the month. Makes sense. So 31st of January 2023. And what I want to do is I want to essentially transfer the closing stock balance, which is essentially it's currently sat on my profit and loss in the form of purchases. So I want to reduce that cost of sales value by the closing stock figure. So I'm going to post first of all against my closing stock nominal code 5201. I'll ignore the extra reference and the department. I'll just put closing stock. T9 tax code. We don't want this to be picked up on the VAT return. And what we want to do is credit the nominal code with the closing stock figure. So £5,000 in this case. And I'm essentially transferring that balance across to my balance sheet stock account. Now, if you've got different categories of opening and closing stock, you may break it down between different nominal codes. You might do a similar option for things like work in progress. But we're just going to do the one in this instance, just to keep it nice and simple. Just press F6 to copy the details down. And then we'll tab into the debit column. So again, the closing stock figure is £5,000. Now we'll come on to the reverse journals option a little bit later on. Cover that in a different maybe when we come to the end of February, we'll do that one. And I'll save that. So that's a nice 2-line journal, nice and simple, that one. Now the impact that that's had, if we now have a look at the profit and loss report, again, we'll just do January only. And okay that. What we've now got is we've got our £12,000, our sales. Let's just maximize that as well to make it a little bit clearer for you. So we've got our product sales of £12,000. We've got our purchases that we've made in the month. And then we've got our stock value. So in this case, we want to reduce the value of our purchases by the value of the closing stock. So we're reducing it by £5,000. So this is where we've now got, rather than it being £2,000, we've got that £7,000 in. So it's all about, I suppose, doing adjustments so you can compare period on period. Now, how often you do these journals will be dependent on yourself. Some of you will do them on a monthly basis. Some might just do it on a quarterly basis, 6 monthly, or even just an annual basis. It might be something like you let your accountant do. So up to you. Depends how often you're going to be reporting. If you're not comparing monthly profit and losses, then you don't really need to do these on a monthly basis. It's really when you're comparing different periods to different periods. So hopefully you're still with me at that point. So that was the closing stock for January. Now, what it also means at that stage is if I run a balance sheet at that point, just preview it. And again, I'll run that one up to the end of January only. What we've got in January is we've now got a stock figure. So a positive stock figure as at the end of January, so we can see what our stock was worth at that point in time. So we've still got our debtors, which in my case is my customers. I can see what the total money owed to me is, and I've also got my creditors as well, that £10,000 worth of purchases I've made. Right, let's just close out of that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the closing stock for one period is going to be the opening stock for the next period. So what I essentially want to do is transfer that closing stock for January back into the opening stock for the month of February. So we're doing a similar journal, but we're just really switching it round a little bit. So this time I'll do opening stock. Again, I'll use the first of the month. Again, it probably makes more sense in your head to do that, but up to you. As long as it falls into the right period, it makes no difference. It'll impact on my profit and loss account in the correct way. We'll tab down to the nominal code. And what I'll do this time is, well, I always think of it in my head, right, I'm transferring it back from the balance sheet back to the profit and loss. So I like to put them in balance sheet and then profit and loss order for the opening stock. So this time, against the balance sheet code, we want to credit that with the £5,000. And I'm going to post this against the opening stock nominal code. Now, there will be no harm in posting it against the closing stock figure. I think when you do it manually, you are encouraged to actually split them. You'll see that the wizard does them, I think possibly both against the same nominal code. But we'll have a look at the wizard in just a moment. I'm going to use that opening stock nominal code. Again, F6 to copy the details down. And I'm going to put the £5,000 in there. I'm going to save it. Right, now profit and loss for January would still be the same. We haven't done any adjustments yet, or any further adjustments. We've just done that extra journal into the month of February. Now, what we did say on the example is, as at the end of February, we had £1,000 worth of the stock left. We didn't make any purchases, but we had £1,000 left. So we started with £5,000 worth of stock. We've used £4,000 of that, and we're left with £1,000 worth of the stock. So what we want to do this time is we want to post a similar journal to what we looked at originally for closing stock of £1,000 as at the end of February. So we'll do a journal. I'll just put stock this time. I'm going to do it as at the end of February. And the nominal code I'm going to use, 5201, closing stock. For that nominal code, I want to credit that with the closing stock value, 1,000. And I want to debit the other nominal code. So essentially what you're doing is you're just almost like you're moving that stock value back and forwards. So it's essentially repeating what we've already looked at. Now, rather than me post closing stock on the end of February and then go in and post opening stock, reversing the debits and credits on the first of the following month, what I can now do, if you're on the standard or the professional level, is say, right, I want you to post this journal, but then I want you to reverse that journal, and I want you to do it on, in this case, I'll say the first day of the following month. So this is where this lends itself, this option. It just saves you a little bit of time. Now, I can't do it the other way. I couldn't do sort of be posting opening stock and say, actually, I want to backdate the the closing stock. You've got to do it in date order. So this date here has to be after this date at the top. So we're saying post this journal on this date, and then what I want you to do is reverse it. So reversing the debits and credits to the same nominal codes, but using this date. I'll just save that, and that's it done. Right, now if we now go back to the profit and loss, preview it, and I will do it for February only at this stage. Preview that one. So we got our sales. We didn't have any purchases. And we've got our stock value. So what we did was we brought 5,000, in case you're thinking, oh, it should be a negative. It shouldn't. We started with £5,000 and we were left with £1,000. So of the stock that we had, we've used £4,000 worth of that stock in this month, and that's why it's a positive value. Yes, our stock's gone down, but it's because we've used that. So we're assigning £4,000 worth of the original purchases into that period. So again, it's showing us the 11,000 less the 4,000. So that's essentially, that's our cost of sales adjustment. So opening stock, which was 5,000, plus purchases, which is 0, less the closing stock, which was 1,000. So gives us 4,000 in total. As we can see on a year to date, it is showing a minus because it's still showing the original purchases less whatever closing stock we got left. So as you can see, it's just a case of repeating those journals to make those adjustments to your profit and loss report. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back to the slides. I hope I haven't lost you at that point. It's one of those concepts that sometimes it can take you a little while to get your head around, and it's one of those from sort of my experience of supporting customers, and I know others as well, which will support people on this. It's one of those queries that sometimes can be a bit quite time consuming, trying to correct people's journals and then trying to get them to understand exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it's all to do with that cost of sales adjustment that you want to show on your P&L. Right, now if I just pop back to the slides for a moment, I'm going to show you how you now can avoid having to post those journals manually. So we're going to look at the wizards option. Now the wizard option, it's available in all levels of the software, so essentials, standard, and the professional level. And this will save you having to do those manual journals, so going in and doing an opening stock journal, a closing stock journal. Now this will use your default nominal codes. However, if you're using different nominal codes in the wizard, it will retain those settings. So you should only need to change it once. Your closing stock nominal code is, in this instance, it's used for both opening and closing stock. So it just uses the one when you're using the wizard, as opposed to splitting it between an opening stock nominal code and a closing stock nominal code. Now I'll explain the other options as we go through that wizard. So let's go back to my screen, almost like start again at this stage. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to quickly restore back. So to essentially undo those journals that we've just been posting. So I'll just quickly restore that. Super quick, because it's, again, just a handful of transactions, this one. There we go. So we're back to just having the 4 transactions at this stage. So those 4 I mentioned, the purchase and the 3 sales. Right, now to access the wizard, we go to modules, wizards, and opening and closing stock. Now this is going to be a little bit different this time, because opening and closing stock, you're doing it for the relevant month. So you're trying to think, right, in this case, I need to post the opening stock for journal for January and the closing stock for journal. So I'm doing that month separately. Whereas I think when you think about doing it manually, you think about doing the closing stock followed by the following opening stock. You tend to group those two together. Still do it at the end of the month, and it will post the adjustments for you. So modules, wizards, opening and closing stock. So I want to pop the date in. Now, you tend to find that most people, again, will still use the last day of the month. Pop in a reference, just call it stock. Details, I'll just put stock in there as well. It's picked up my nominal codes by default. Again, if you needed to, you can change those, but it will pick the 1001 up and the 5201 as default. Come on to the closing stock value in a moment. Previous closing stock value, so basically our opening stock value for the month is 0. So we're just going to leave that there for January. The closing stock value, I just need to key in. Now, from the example that we were looking at earlier, we know that's £5,000. Now, there is a calculate option here. Now, do be careful with this one. When you click calculate, actually, I'll just click it because I can always override it. When I click calculate, it pulls through a closing stock value for me. So this is going to look at your product records, so the ones that are flagged as stock records, and it's going to try and work out what the value of that stock is. Now, this will be essentially using the stock valuation report. Now, if you're not familiar with stock valuation reports, we did run a webinar on that one last week. So do check out the recording on that one. We go into them in a lot more detail. And it will use the actual cost price based on what you've currently got in stock. So this can't be used if you retrospectively. So if, like myself, you were now looking to go back and do these journals for January, for instance, when I click calculate, it doesn't look at this value here, this date, and say this is what the value was at the time. So do be careful with that one. It looks at your current stock. So in this case, what I want to do for my closing stock value, I'm going to override that, what it's just calculated, and I'm going to say it was £5,000. Now I can see the journal, and that's what we posted earlier. So I'm going to click post transactions. So it's just the one journal in this case, and that's for the closing stock. There's no opening stock for January. Again, we can see the journal that's being posted. So again, transferring it from the 5201 across to the 1001. Now let's say we come on to February. So modules, wizards, opening, closing stock. We set the date. Reference, I'll just say stock again. Same for the details. You can see it's pulled through the same nominal codes. You can also see that it's showing me the previous closing stock value. So remember, the closing stock from one period is the opening stock for the next period. So that's what it's saying. The previous closing stock value was £5,000, which is right. I shouldn't need to change that if you keep using the wizard. All I need to fill in at that point is my closing stock value. Now, my closing stock value at the end of February, in the example that we looked at earlier, was £1,000. If I just tab out of those fields, you can see this is the journal that's going to be posted for us. So it's got opening stock, and then it's got the closing stock journal as well. And again, all I do at that point, I click post transactions. and that's it done. So that saves me quite a bit of time. I don't have to think, oh, debits and credits, I get mixed up with those, or you put them in the wrong way around, or something along those lines. Very easy to make a mistake with a journal. But again, if you want to learn about corrections, get yourself signed up for the webinar. Right, we'll quickly just run through a couple of final reports. Profit and loss, we'll do that for January only. So you can see it works in exactly the same way as what we've looked at. Impacts on the reports in the same way. There we go. So in our period, £12,000 worth of purchases, sorry, £12,000 worth of sales, £10,000 worth of purchases, less the closing stock value, giving us a gross profit in this instance of £7,000. And if we run that report again, running it for February only this time, again, you'll see it has the same effect as what we've just done. So I would, if you can, use the wizard, as it's just going to save you a little bit of time. It makes things that little bit easier. Now, if you've got any questions on what we covered today, or if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I've tried and I still haven't got a clue, remember the recording is available. So have a look at that. You've also always got the demo data and the practice company to have a go of this in, so you can see the impact on that. And the information is readily available in the help center as well. Nice and easy to follow that through then. Right, okay, let's quickly pop back to the slides. So it does bring us to the end of the demo. So I hope I haven't confused you too much in today's session. Just to quickly explain a little bit more of the additional support that's available. So Help Center, you can access that whenever needed. You've got recordings available as well. So the link to the recording will be available on your follow-up email. That will be with you in around about an hour's time. If you get really stuck, our support team is on hand and they can assist you as well. Now, if you've got any questions, we are going to hang around just for about another 5 minutes or so, just to see if any questions do come through. Very quiet on the questions front today. So if you've got any, quickly pop them in there and I'll try my best to, or Jackie or Abby will try their best to pick those up. Just to quickly mention some of the upcoming webinars we've got. So tomorrow, we're going to be running a session on custom fields. We're then going to be picking up somewhat on some of the favorites of the sessions that we've run previously. So repeating the VAT return session, VAT reports, company archive, corrections that I've mentioned a little bit today. Come along, find out how to go about correcting journals if you make any mistakes with them. We've got invoices, orders, and quotes over the next month. And also we'll be looking at the chart of accounts and your management reports. Something that we have introduced at the beginning of May, or quick learns. So we run these on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. We just concentrate on options within the software. So far we've covered things like batch invoice and credits. We've run a session on the customer receipt option, customer refund, batch supplier payments, and we've got loads of other sessions booked in as well. So if you are interested, again, they'll be on the booking page. The link's included on your follow-up. So any questions? Ricardo, your question there, how do you attach a document to the journal? Let me quickly pop back to my screen. I'll try and pick this one up for you. So let's run through a quick demo of that one. So if I go into the journal entry, you've basically got an option at the top to add the attachment. So when you're entering your journal, so let me just quickly enter one, it doesn't really matter what it is. I'll just choose 2 random nominal codes on the top of the list. We pop a value in there as well. And we'll click add attachment. And then at that point, we can literally just browse. So you could choose whatever your document is that you want to use. Most document types, there's loads of them that would be supported that you can then attach. So just select your journal, your documents, you can attach it. If I just OK that, and then save my journal, and that's it done. If I have a look in the likes of transactions, I can highlight the journal, and we've got the view attachment option at the top. And it'll just take you to the location where that's stored. So nice and easy to attach those. You also mentioned about how can you add a project column into the journal screen. You can't is the answer to that one. You can't do journals against projects. If you need to post adjustments against projects, then what you would need to do is within projects is use the charges and credits option. But you don't have access to the project column itself within the journal window. You did mention that your software is not working in the same way as what I've just mentioned. If it's not, get in touch with our support team, and they'll be able to have a look at that with you. Another question that Jackie's picking up at the moment as well, mentioned about excuse me, product reports. So a quick one. So good option to see what a product record is set up as is to display the extra column. So if I go into products and services and just right click on your column heading and switch on the item type, and I can see in this instance I've only got the one product set up, but it actually shows as a stock item. Now if you've got loads of products, obviously it's going to show them whether they're a non-stock, a stock, or if you're on the professional level, a service item. So it will list them. And probably a nice, easy way of getting, so you can start reporting on that, is probably just to send it to Excel at that point. So I just click send to Excel. If you've got the desktop version of Excel installed, there it is, straight into Excel. That can start reporting it that way. You can also potentially filter on that as well, so only certain records will be transferred across for you. Hope that makes sense. I'll not save that. Any other questions at all? If you do think of any afterwards, you know where we are. Obviously, you've got access to the support team. Do check the information in the help centre, and remember, you've got access to the demonstration company. And for things like this, I sometimes think that it's a little bit better just to use the practice data, because you start with nothing. And it means a bit like what we've done today, you're not being distracted when you're trying these things with other information in the background. So when I was running a profit and loss account, you can see the sales figure, you can see the purchase figure, and you can see that closing stock figure as well, and the adjustment that's being posted. So you're not getting distracted by all the overheads, etc. But do watch the recording again if needed. Right, okay, let's quickly pop back to the slides. We'll wrap up at that point. So let me just quickly thank you for coming along. Appreciate you coming along. I hope you have enjoyed it and you found it useful. There will be a little survey pop up as you leave the session today. So if you can take a minute to share any thoughts or ideas that you might have for webinars going forward, if you could take a minute to complete that, would be greatly appreciated. We love reading those comments. Your follow-up email, as I mentioned, it will be with you in around about an hour's time. So that will include the links that you need so you can watch a recording. You'll be able to register for other webinars. And if you've missed any sessions, there's a link so you can watch the other recordings as well. So we'll end the webinar at that point. Once again, many thanks for coming along. Take care, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you on some other webinars soon. Many thanks.